15 minutes before the Thanksgiving service, my stepmother pinned me in the vestry, whispering, "If you say one word, this whole city will swallow you." I didn't say a word. I recorded it. When the church bells rang, the pastor stepped up to the pulpit and spoke the truth I thought would bury me. That night, I understood why they call truth a spotlight. It exposes every stain, even on the whitest robe. My name is Riley Ashford. I'm 31 years old, and I live in Denver. My job is to find the stories that numbers tell when people try to make them lie. At Cedarline Analytics, in a glass tower downtown, I'm a senior fraud investigator. It means I spend 50, sometimes 60 hours a week staring at spreadsheets until the patterns emerge. I look for the digital fingerprints, the rounding errors that hide felonies, the ghosts in the machine. I'm good at it because I don't believe in coincidence. I believe in data. It's a skill I learned as a child, though back then, it was just called survival. At home, they had a different name for my skill set. They called it helping out. Helping out was the polite term for me. At 26, liquidating my 401k to silently pay off my father's second mortgage, just before the bank foreclosed. Helping out was the series of temporary loans I'd provided over the last decade. Money for car repairs, emergency dental work, overdue utility bills, and vague investment opportunities that evaporated on contact. The debts were always described as temporary, but they had lasted for years, becoming a permanent, unspoken line item in my personal budget. I was the family ATM, the emergency fund, the adult in the room. I was the safety net that allowed them to live a life of comfortable illusion, shielding them from the consequences of my father's choices. My father, Graham Ashford, is a man defined by the space he used to occupy. He lost his executive job during the last recession and never quite found his footing, but he maintained the facade. He still wore expensive, slightly outdated suits to run errands, projecting an air of a man merely between successes. He had the pride, but none of the capital. The real power in the house, the engine of their social life, was Vivian. Vivian Ashford, my stepmother. She's a woman of relentless, polished charm, the kind that thrives in Denver's affluent philanthropic circles. She is all soft smiles, tasteful pearl earrings, and a voice that sounds like expensive wind chimes. She can make a request for a 5-figure donation sound like she's doing you a personal favor. This autumn, she was enjoying her moment in the spotlight. Vivian was the head treasurer for the Rocky Ridge Fellowship's annual Thanksgiving fundraising drive. The church was a major player in the city, and the Thanksgiving meal for every home was its flagship charity event. You couldn't escape it. Banners hung over Colfax. Vivian's smiling face was on posters in coffee shop windows, urging the community to share the blessing. The city was buzzing, and Vivian, as the one holding the purse strings, was at the center of it all. She wasn't just raising money, she was curating her own image as the city's compassionate matriarch. I was working late, reconciling my own accounts in the harsh blue light of my monitor. It was the first week of November. I was meticulous about my finances, a habit born of necessity. I had to know exactly where every dollar went, because I knew 2 people who were always ready to claim it. That's when I saw it. An automated clearinghouse transfer I didn't recognize. Not huge, just under $500. Then I scrolled back. Another one, 3 weeks prior. And one last month. They were small enough to look like forgotten autopays. I pulled up the church's public donation site. The dates of my mystery transfers matched, to the day, the dates Vivian had publicly celebrated miracle donations that pushed the fund over a new threshold. My blood went cold. I waited until Sunday dinner, the mandatory weekly performance of our happy, functional family. I brought it up carefully, framing it as a security concern. "I found some weird transactions in my account," I said, keeping my voice level. "It looks like automated payments, and I'm worried my details were compromised." Graham didn't even look up from his roast beef. "It's a bank error. Riley, those systems are always glitching. You should call them tomorrow." He waved his fork, dismissing the digital theft of my money as an inconvenience. Vivian, however, stopped eating. She placed her knife and fork perfectly parallel on her plate and reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. Her rings felt cold against my skin. "Riley, honey," she said, her voice dripping with practiced sincerity, "we are doing the Lord's work. It's such a stressful time, managing the fund. It's possible I made a small error when entering pledge data." She smiled, a gentle, forgiving smile. "But you know, the Bible says giving is the highest blessing. Maybe your heart knew it, even if your head forgot to tell you." She squeezed my hand, a gesture of spiritual blackmail. I pulled my hand back slowly. "It's not a blessing if I didn't authorize it. Vivian, it's just a transfer." "Such technicalities," she sighed, turning to Graham. "She's always so focused on the little numbers." I glanced at my half-brother, Nate, at 24. He was still deep in Vivian's orbit. He was staring at his phone, his shoulders hunched. We used to be close, back before he understood what my checks represented. Now, he was distant. Vivian was paying his university tuition, a fact she mentioned whenever he voiced an opinion contrary to hers. He looked at me, just for a second, with an expression I couldn't place. Annoyance, maybe, or guilt. Then he looked away. He was bought and paid for. He wouldn't be helping. I had a passing respect for the church's public face, Pastor Caleb Whitlow. He was charismatic in a way that felt genuine, less fire and brimstone, more community organizer. He had a booming, comfortable laugh that made people want to believe in whatever he was selling. He was a pillar of the community, and Vivian had cultivated his absolute trust. I kept my distance. My work had taught me that the most charming frontmen often shielded the darkest back rooms. The next Monday, my boss at Cedarline, a man named Mark, dropped a new file on my desk. A client, a mid-level environmental nonprofit, was bleeding money. "This one's messy, Riley," he said, tapping the folder. "The executive director suspects the treasurer. Looks like a classic donation rounding scheme. The treasurer set up a shell LLC. Sounds almost identical to the nonprofit's name. She rounds down the public donations, just by a few cents or dollars, and siphons the difference into the shell. It's clean, quiet, and adds up fast. See what you can find." I stared at the words on the file. Donation rounding scheme, shell LLC, treasurer. It felt less like an assignment and more like a diagnosis. The pattern he described wasn't just similar to what I was seeing at home. It was a perfect mirror. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed at the office. Using the secure servers and the industrial-strength printers, I stopped being a daughter. I became an investigator. I ran my own name, my father's, and Vivian's through every public database I had access to. I printed my bank statements going back 2 years. I logged into my credit reports. I pulled the PDF donation receipts Vivian had so helpfully emailed me for tax purposes, receipts that now looked like calculated taunts. I traced the electronic routing numbers. I highlighted the dates. I cross-referenced the times of the transfers with Vivian's social media posts. Here she was, celebrating a $20,000 anonymous gift, posted at 10:30 in the morning, and here was my bank statement, showing a transfer for $450 at 10:28. It wasn't a rounding scheme. That was too slow for her. She was just taking it. The forgotten utility bill had been a test to see if I was paying attention. When I wasn't, she'd gotten bolder. My printer hummed, spitting out page after page. The pile of evidence grew. It was a system, a cold, deliberate siphoning of my money into her public triumph. The call came 2 days later. It was Vivian, her voice bright and brittle. "Riley, darling, we're having a special family dinner. Just us, before the big service. A little quiet time before the Thanksgiving rush. Tonight, 7. My stomach tightened into a cold knot. Quiet time was code for an ambush. I walked into the house at 7 sharp. The smell of expensive pot roast and simmering anxiety filled the air. Graham was pacing by the fireplace, rearranging coasters. Vivian stood in the dining room, the table set for 3. Nate was conveniently at the library. On the gleaming mahogany table, next to my plate, was a single manila folder. "We have a problem," Vivian said. She didn't bother with the charm, Her voice was flat, metallic. We? I asked, not moving from the doorway. The program, Graham cut in, his voice rising, already defensive. The homeless meal program. There was a shortfall, a vendor issue, a technicality. A shortfall, I repeated. The gaslighting hadn't worked, so they were pivoting to a manufactured crisis. Vivian opened the folder. It was a bank statement for the church fund, printed in color. The balance was shockingly low. We are $10,000 short of the goal. Riley, she said, her eyes pinning me. The final payment for the catering company is due in 48 hours. If we don't pay it, hundreds of people, hundreds of families, will not eat on Thanksgiving. It will be a public humiliation. The church's reputation will be ruined. I looked at the statement, then at her. You mean your reputation? This is about the community, she snapped, her composure cracking. Riley, Graham said, stepping toward me. He was using the voice, the deep, disappointed father tone that used to shatter me. We need you to fix this. Just a temporary loan. $10,000. To save the program. To save Thanksgiving. I looked at the two of them, my father, the hollow shell, wringing his hands, my stepmother, the smiling predator, her eyes like chips of ice. They didn't see a daughter. They saw a line of credit. They saw the solution to a problem they had created, a problem they manufactured by stealing from me in the first place, and now they were demanding I pay for it again, this time with a wire transfer instead of a quiet theft. All the years of silent compliance, all the checks I'd written to keep the peace, all the temporary debts that became my permanent burden, it all converged into a single, hard point of clarity in my chest. I looked at Graham. I looked at Vivian. No. It was the first time I had ever said that word to them and truly meant it. The word hung in the air, heavier than the expensive crystal goblets on the dining table. Graham stopped pacing. Vivian's polite mask didn't just fade. It inverted, collapsing into a mask of pure reptilian fury. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of a storm front hitting a mountain. It was the sound of the air pulling back just before the lightning strike, and I knew I had just started a war. I didn't go back to my apartment. The no I had delivered hung in my father's house like a verdict, and I knew the time for quiet compliance was over. They had declared war. I intended to win it using my own weapons. I drove to my office at Cedar Line, the empty downtown tower a silent sanctuary. The storm had broken, and now I was the investigator. My family was no longer my family. They were my case. I started with the payment IDs from my own bank statements, the small, unauthorized transfers. I traced them into the Rocky Ridge Fellowship's public donation portal. They landed cleanly, logged as anonymous, but they didn't stay there. My work at Cedar Line had trained me to spot the go-to-go chain. Money comes in, it's celebrated, and then it's moved sideways before it can be counted. I needed to find the exit. I spent hours running Boolean searches, cross-referencing the church's public tax filings with Denver's business registry, and there it was. Not a church account, but a limited liability company, filed just 6 months ago. The name was a masterpiece of deceptive banality. Ashford Community Outreach, LLC. It was a shell, designed to look like an official, affiliated partner of the church. The registered address wasn't the church. It was a P.O. box at a mail franchise in Cherry Creek. I ran a quick check on the box holder's agreement. The secondary name on the registration, the person with the key, was Vivian Ashford. This LLC was the intermediate wallet. This was the drain. I leveraged my access to professional-grade background check software, the kind Cedar Line paid a premium for. The LLC had a bank account, and that bank account had a corporate credit card attached to it. A card opened using an email address that made my skin crawl. R.Ashford, community@gmail.com. It was a forgery of my identity, close enough to look legitimate on a cursory check, designed to frame me if the whole thing blew up. The card statements told the real story. The Thanksgiving Meal for Every Home Fund was not. It turned out, paying for turkeys and stuffing. It was paying for a $2,000 charge at the Neiman Marcus in Cherry Creek. It was paying for $400 at a high-end salon. It was paying for expensive dinners at steakhouses, all categorized under vendor meetings. I pulled up Vivian's social media. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I found the dates. The same afternoon as the Neiman Marcus charge, Vivian had posted a photo of herself, smiling, holding a box of canned goods. The caption read, "A blessed day distributing early gifts to our partners at the city shelter." She was literally funding her shopping sprees on the same day she was performing her public charity. But I needed to see the church's internal books. I needed to know how she was hiding the withdrawals from the committee. I remembered her bragging at a family dinner about how wonderfully modern the church's tech was, how they'd moved everything to the cloud. It didn't take me long, a few guesses at the URL structure, and I was looking at the committee's master Google sheet. It was a disaster of mismanagement, or rather, a masterpiece of deliberate neglect. The entire financial record of a multi-$100,000 fund was a single spreadsheet. Vivian, using her personal email address, had sole editorial control. There was no independent oversight, no required second signature for expenditures, no audit trail. She was the treasurer, the bookkeeper, and the auditor, all in one. I couldn't use this. A judge would throw out evidence from an unsecured Google sheet I had no right to access. I needed the same information, but through the front door. I went home, slept for 3 hours, and at 9 a.m, I sent a formal email. I sent it to the public address for the Thanksgiving committee, which I knew went straight to Vivian, but I also copied the church's general administrative inbox. I identified myself as Riley Ashford, a concerned and longtime donor, which was technically true. I cited my professional background in fraud analytics and stated that I had observed several irregularities in the public reporting. I formally requested a complete, itemized copy of the fund's statements. Vivian's reply came in under 5 minutes, and it was sent only to me. The professional charm was gone, replaced by pure, distilled indignation. "Riley, I am personally shocked and deeply wounded. Are you questioning my faith? Are you accusing God's servants of impropriety? This is a holy trust." It was a brilliant deflection. She wasn't answering the financial question. She was accusing me of a spiritual crime. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Graham. It was the hammer blow. "Vivian is in tears. You have no idea what you're doing. You need to drop this, now. If you make a scene, if you embarrass this family, I will make sure the entire city knows you tried to steal from God. Vivian is a pillar of this community. Who do you think they'll believe?" I looked at the text. You tried to steal from God. They weren't just building a defense. They were building my prosecution. I knew I was in over my head. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was wire fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. I needed a lawyer. I called Mariah Keene. We'd been in the same scholarship program in college. Too smart, broke kids fighting for a foothold. Now, she was a litigator at a top Denver firm, specializing in white-collar crime. We met at a sterile coffee shop downtown. I didn't say hello. I just slid the folder across the table. The LLC registration, the credit card statements, the side-by-side screenshots of the shopping sprees, and the charity posts. She read for 5 minutes, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up, her eyes sharp. "Okay, Riley, you've got a hell of a case, but it's 90% circumstantial," she said, tapping the credit card statement. "This is good. The LLC is better, but it's not cold. You don't have the hand on the keyboard. You can't prove who moved the money from the church to the LLC. You can't prove who is using this card. You need IP addresses. You need device login logs. And if you can get it, you need ATM camera footage of who's spending the cash." The hand on the keyboard. She was right. I went back to the office. I focused on the donation processing platform the church used, a third-party vendor called Pledge Forward. I was a registered donor in their system. They had my data. They also had the church's administrative data. I crafted a careful email to Pledge Forward's technical support, not as an investigator, but as a user. I cited specific privacy statutes and filed an authorized user data request, claiming I had reason to believe my account had been improperly accessed and linked to administrative actions. I did not authorize. It was the truth. It took them 48 hours, but they sent it, the logs, not just my user logs, but the full administrative access logs associated with my account's activity. I felt like I'd struck gold. The files were dense, a wall of text and timestamps. I filtered for all outbound transfers from the main Boîte à Un fund. There they were, dozens of transfers, all moving to the routing number for the Ashford Community Outreach LLC. I looked at the metadata for those specific transactions, the admin user who had approved them, the IP address. It wasn't an IP address at the Rocky Ridge Fellowship, it was a residential IP from Comcast. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I ran a reverse lookup on the IP. The result flashed on my screen, a digital confirmation of what I already knew in my gut. The IP was registered to Graham Ashford, at my father's home address. But I wasn't done. The log file was beautifully, wonderfully detailed. It captured the MAC address of the device that had initiated the transfers, the unique hardware fingerprint of the computer. I pulled up Facebook. I scrolled back 2 weeks, to the post I'd half remembered. There it was, Vivian, sitting in her pristine home office, smiling for the camera, the caption, "Working hard for the needy, so much planning for the big day." On her desk, perfectly angled toward the camera, was her brand new, silver MacBook Pro. I ran the MAC address from the logs against a hardware database. It wasn't just a match for a MacBook Pro. It was a match for the specific high-end model, released 3 months ago, that she was posing with. I had her. I had the hand on the keyboard. I started printing the pledge forward logs, the IP lookup report, the MAC address verification, the Facebook screenshot with the laptop clearly visible. I added them to the LLC registration, the PICA-O box agreement, the fraudulent credit card statements, and the side-by-side comparisons of her spending and her charity posts. I put it all in a black binder, organizing it with plastic tabs. The stack of paper was thick, heavy, and cold. It was no longer a suspicion. It was a timeline. It was an indictment. It was a black file, and it was ready. After 2 days of absolute silence, a silence so heavy it felt like a tactical maneuver, my phone rang. It was Vivian. Her voice was unrecognizable. The brittle, demanding edge from the $10,000 dinner was gone, replaced by a warm maternal syrup that turned my stomach. "Riley, honey," she cooed. "I think we all just got a little overheated the other night. Stress, it gets to all of us. But we're family. Why don't you come over tonight? Just us. We'll have a proper meal and just put this all behind us." It was the classic predator's move. Feign retreat. Lure the prey back into the open. I knew it was a trap, but my black binder of evidence was still incomplete. Mariah's words echoed in my head. "You need the hand on the keyboard." I had the MAC address, but I didn't have the final, damning piece. I needed to see them, to hear the lies, to record the confession that would nail the door shut. "Okay, Vivian," I said, my voice deliberately tired. "I'll be there." I walked into the house at 7. The performance was staggering. The entire home was infused with the scent of baked ham and cloves, a forced, aggressive domesticity. Christmas carols were playing softly from the ceiling speakers. Even though it was still weeks before Thanksgiving, it was an auditory tranquilizer. The table was set with the good china, the one they only used for show. It was an elaborate stage set for a simple execution. Graham was there, and so was Nate. My stomach tightened when I saw him. He was the variable I hadn't accounted for. He sat at the table, scrolling relentlessly on his phone, not once looking up as I entered. "Riley! Wonderful!" Vivian swept out from the kitchen, wearing an apron over a silk blouse, the perfect image of a woman who didn't just cook, but curated meals. She kissed the air near my cheek. Graham just grunted from his armchair. We ate. The conversation was a masterpiece of avoidance. We talked about the weather. We talked about a new development in the Highlands. We talked about the Broncos' failing season. Nate offered one-word answers, his eyes glued to his screen. I played along. The dutiful daughter, my hand in my jacket pocket, my thumb resting on the small, hard rectangle of my digital voice recorder. I had turned it on in the car, and the tiny microphone was picking up every clink of silverware, every false note in Vivian's laughter. Vivian brought out the agreement with the coffee. She slid a single manila folder across the polished mahogany table, stopping it right next to my cup. "This is just a formality," she said, her voice dropping into a businesslike, confidential tone. "Just to avoid any more rumors. It's a simple family silence agreement. It just says that none of us will discuss family finances with outside parties, for the good of the church, for the good of the fund." I didn't touch it. "Rumors?" Graham stood up then, moving from his chair to stand behind Vivian, near the fireplace. He wasn't looking at the folder. He was looking at me, his hand gripping his smartphone, holding it tightly. It wasn't a casual gesture. He was holding it like a weapon. "You've been emotional," Graham said, his voice low. "People talk. This just settles things, protects the family, protects the good work Vivian is doing." I looked at Nate. "Nate, you're okay with this?" He finally looked up. His eyes were hollow, exhausted. "It's just an agreement, Riley. It's not a big deal. It's to protect the media campaign." "The media campaign?" Vivian smiled. "Oh, we haven't told you." The committee was so impressed with Nate's ideas. They've offered him a position, director of new media for the church, a paid position, starting in January. He's going to do such good work. His silence was the down payment. His signature on their lie was the closing cost. He'd been bought, and the first payment was his betrayal of me. I pushed the folder back toward her. "I'm not signing this." The hymns on the stereo seemed to get louder, filling the sudden cold silence. Vivian's smile didn't fade, but it changed. It thinned. It was no longer a smile of welcome. It was a smile of bared teeth. Graham's grip on his phone tightened. "Riley," Vivian said, leaning forward, the matriarch act dissolving. "Let me be very clear. You are a smart girl. You work with numbers. You understand leverage. You are currently threatening the food in the mouths of hundreds of poor, hungry people. Is your little fit of pride worth that? Is it worth their Thanksgiving dinner?" "My pride has nothing to do with it," I said, my voice as cold as hers. "The money is gone. You spent it. I'm not signing a document that makes me complicit in your fraud." "Fraud?" Graham barked, a flush rising on his neck. "That's a strong word, young lady." "It's the correct one," I said. "The LLC, the PO, box, the credit card, I've seen it all." Vivian's eyes flicked down to my jacket pocket. My hand was still inside it. She was sharp. She'd been watching my body language, watching where my tension was held. "What is that?" she said, her eyes narrowing. "In your pocket." Before I could react, she lunged. It wasn't the graceful move of a hostess. It was fast and reptilian. She grabbed my wrist, pulling my hand from my pocket, and ripped the recorder out. It clattered onto the mahogany table, the small red recording light still blinking. Nate gasped. Graham just stared, momentarily stunned. Vivian looked at the device, then at me. Her face was pale with a sudden, pure rage. "The student," she hissed, her voice a low vibration. "Turning against the teacher? Did you think I was stupid? Did you really think you could walk into my house and record me?" Graham stepped forward, his face purple. "This is what we get? This is the thanks? After everything we've done for you? The disloyalty." He was yelling now. "The performance over. The ingratitude. Do you have any idea what it cost to raise you? The sacrifices we made?" It was the final, desperate move of a weak man, presenting the bill for a love I'd never asked for, a love that always came with strings and, apparently, a gag order. "I'm done," I said. I stood up, kicking my chair back. I left the recorder on the table. I didn't need it anymore. Her reaction was the confession. I walked to the front door. I could hear Graham shouting behind me, a string of insults about my cold heart and my ungrateful nature. Nate was silent. As I grabbed the doorknob, Vivian's voice cut through the air, sharp and final. "You will regret this, Riley." I turned. She was standing in the hallway, her face a mask of composed hatred. "You have no idea what you've just done." As I walked past her, she grabbed my arm. Her fingers dug into my bicep. She shoved something into my coat pocket. It was a single, folded envelope. "A party favor," she whispered. I didn't look at it until I was in the sterile, safe light of my car. Parked down the street, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I pulled out the envelope. Inside were not handwritten notes. They were bank statements, printouts from a different account. It was a brilliantly executed trap. The statements were from the Ashford Community Outreach LLC. They showed the inbound transfers from the church fund, just as I had found, but they also showed a series of outbound transfers, regular, monthly payments, wired to an account I didn't recognize, and on the top corner of the statement, in the account holder field, was a name. R. Ashford. It wasn't me, but it was designed to look like me. They weren't just defending, they were attacking. They were building the narrative that I wasn't a whistleblower. I was a disgruntled family member, a thief trying to cover my tracks by pointing the finger at my innocent stepmother. They had planted the evidence on me. The phone call came the next morning. It was Pastor Caleb Whitlow. His voice wasn't the warm, booming baritone from the pulpit. It was strained, worried. "Riley," he said, and he didn't use any pleasantries. "I've received some deeply troubling information from an anonymous source." My blood ran cold. "What kind of information, Pastor?" "A text message," he said, and I could hear him sigh. It said, "Riley Ashford is sabotaging the fund from the inside. She's the one you should be investigating. Riley, I don't want to believe this. You've always been a good, quiet member of this community, but I have to take this seriously." "It's a lie," I said, my voice flat. "It's a lie, and I can prove it." "I hope so," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. But the doubt was there. The seed was planted. "I need to meet with you. We need to get clarity. Before this goes public, just a private chat. Before the Thanksgiving service, in the vestry, 30 minutes before we begin." The vestry, the room where I'd been threatened in the hook, not his office, not a neutral coffee shop, a small private room, 30 minutes before the biggest public event of her year. Later that same day, I got an email. It was a blast from the church administrator to the entire Thanksgiving committee, which, as a key donor, I was still copied on. Vivian's words were all over it. "My dear friends, it has come to my attention that there are some accounting questions being raised by a distressed family member. We value transparency above all else. To ensure full accountability, we will have a moment of clarification. After the service, we will clear the air and move forward in grace." I saw the trap. It was perfect. They had isolated me. They had planted evidence to frame me. They had poisoned the one man who could stop them. And now, they had scheduled my public execution on their home turf, in their holy house, on their most public day. I was no longer the investigator. I was the sacrifice. Vivian had set the stage for my public execution. My father had provided the character assassination. They had dangled my brother's career as the prize. They thought they had cornered me, turning the church into an arena and Pastor Caleb into a pawn. But my shock wasn't fear. It was the cold, sharp click of a machine locking into place. I had spent my entire career hunting predators who hid their crimes in spreadsheets and shell companies. Vivian was just another case file, and I was done being her victim. I was going to be the auditor of her ruin. My first call was to Mariah Keene. I didn't waste time on emotion. "They're framing me," I said, my voice flat. I explained the planted bank statements, the R. Ashford account, the anonymous text to Pastor Caleb. "Okay." Mariah's voice was all business, cutting through my adrenaline. "This is good. They're overplaying their hand. They've moved from embezzlement to active conspiracy and defamation. First, I'm drafting a sworn affidavit for you right now. It will state, under penalty of perjury, that you did not open, authorize, or have any access to Ashford Community Outreach, LLC. You'll sign it digitally. That's our legal shield. What else? I asked. The statements Vivian gave you, the ones meant to frame you. They're sloppy, they're arrogant, they have to have a digital trail. But we need more. We need something a jury can see. You have the what and the how. You need the who. You need a face. A face. Mariah was right. The IP logs put the transfers at my father's house, but that was still circumstantial. Graham could claim he did it, falling on his sword for Vivian. I needed definitive, visual proof of her involvement in the spending. I went back to the LLC credit card statements. The charges at Neiman Marcus and the steakhouses were damning, but the cash withdrawals were sloppy. There was a pattern, every Friday, for the last 2 months. A $500 cash withdrawal from the same ATM. It was a branch of a small, regional bank, 3 blocks from the Rocky Ridge Fellowship. Close, but not too close. I knew the branch manager there, a man named Henderson. I'd given a lunch and learn seminar on debit card skimming for his staff 3 months ago. A pro bono thing Cedarline organized. I went there in person, holding my Cedarline Analytics badge. Mr. Henderson? I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. Riley Ashford. We met back in August. I'm working on a sensitive, time-critical internal investigation for a client. We have multiple instances of fraudulent cash withdrawal from this specific ATM, tied to a corporate account. I showed him the LLC statement, my finger covering the Ashford name. The cardholder is claiming the charges are fraudulent, that it's identity theft. That's a police matter. Ms. Ashford, he said, already defensive. It will be, I agreed. But the client is high profile. We are trying to contain the internal damage before we file. All I need is the surveillance still for the exact timestamp of this withdrawal. I pointed to the last one, from 3 days prior. Just this one. To confirm if it's our suspect or a third-party skimmer, it will determine the entire direction of our report. He hesitated. It was a breach of protocol. I really shouldn't. I understand, I said, nodding. But the timestamps match a known embezzlement pattern. The sooner we identify the person at the machine, the sooner we can freeze the account and stop the bleeding. It's your bank's machine they're using to launder the funds. That was the word. Launder. His posture changed. He typed for a moment, then swiveled his monitor. Just this one, he said. The image was grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. It was Vivian. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, a dark coat, and she was smiling, feeding the card into the machine. But my eyes snapped to the person standing just behind her, half out of frame. It wasn't my father. It was a man I had never seen before, middle-aged, with a weak chin and a baseball cap pulled down low. He was holding the door open, looking back at her, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. Can you print that? I asked, my voice perfectly level. And, just humor me, can you pull the exterior camera for the parking lot from that same timestamp? I need to see the vehicle. He sighed, but he was in for it now. He typed again. A new image appeared, a dark blue, late-model SUV. The man was getting into the driver's side. The angle of the camera caught the license plate, bright and clear under the fluorescent lights. I thanked Henderson, took the printouts, and walked back to my car. I ran the plate before I even started the engine, using a paid search service on my phone. The result came back in 30 seconds. The 2024 Lincoln Navigator was registered not to Vivian, but to a man named Miles Caffrey. The address listed was for a commercial print shop downtown, Miles Printworks. Miles Printworks. The name scratched at my brain. Why did I know it? I drove to my office, my mind racing. I pulled the family silence agreement from my bag, the one Vivian had tried to force me to sign. I looked at the bottom, at the fine print. Document prepared by Miles Printworks. LLC. He wasn't just a driver, he was the forger. He was the one printing her fake documents. I sat at my desk, the pieces clicking together like tumblers in a lock. The trap Vivian had laid for me, the fake Ashford bank statements, she wouldn't have made those at home. She wouldn't have printed them on the church printer. She would have had her accomplice do it. I opened the PDF file of the fake statements on my laptop, the one she'd given me in the envelope. I didn't look at the numbers. I went to File, then Properties. The metadata told me everything. Author, Miles Caffrey. Creating application, Adobe Acrobat Pro, on Miles Print S1. She hadn't just given me a forged document, she had given me the name of her co-conspirator, digitally watermarked. I opened a new spreadsheet. This was my timeline. This was the counter-narrative. I cross-referenced everything, a symphony of data. Column A, date and time of the IP log from Graham's house, showing the transfer to the LLC. Column B, date and time of the ATM footage, showing Vivian and Miles withdrawing the cash from the LLC. Column C, date and time of the credit card charges at Neiman Marcus. Column D, date and time of the PDF creation, showing Miles forging the statements to frame me. The story was clear. The money was moved from Graham's laptop, withdrawn by Vivian and Miles, spent by Vivian, and covered up by Miles. Graham was the mule. Miles was the forger. Vivian was the architect. Now, there was only one loose end. Nate. I couldn't go into that church with him as a hostile. He was blinded by the promise of a job, by Vivian's manipulation. But he wasn't a criminal. Not yet. I had to neutralize him. I called him. Nate, coffee? 30 minutes. My treat? I didn't give him a chance to say no. We met at a crowded Starbucks. He slouched in, wary, refusing to make eye contact. What do you want, Riley? I'm busy. I have to work on the media plan for the service. This, I said. I slid the ATM printout across the table. Just the one. The close-up of Vivian and the man in the baseball cap. Nate glanced at it. So, it's Vivian. She's getting cash for the fund. Look closer. Nate, who is she with? He stared at it. I don't know. A volunteer. His name is Miles Caffrey, I said, my voice quiet. He owns a print shop. He's also the one who drafted that silence agreement she tried to make us sign. He's also the one who helped her create fake bank statements to frame me for her theft. And that, I said, sliding the photo of the blue SUV across the table, is his car, not the church van. Nate's face went pale. The calculated, defensive look crumbled. He was seeing the truth for the first time. She's not just stealing. Nate, I said, leaning in. She's built a whole separate operation. With him. You're not her media director. You're her cover story. You're the bright, shiny object she's using to distract everyone while she and her partner empty the vault. No, he whispered. But it was weak. He was looking at the photo. She wouldn't. You're smart. You know she would. All I'm asking is that you look at this. I pushed a single piece of paper toward him. The timeline, the IP logs, the ATM times, the metadata. You're building her media campaign. I just thought you deserved to know the truth before it all blows up, before your name is attached to her as an accomplice. He recoiled, as if the paper was toxic. He saw his name, his future, his reputation, all burning down with hers. He finally understood. He was being used. What? What are you going to do? He asked, his voice shaking. I'm going to tell the truth, I said. All I need from you is to do your job. Just run the media as planned. Don't interfere. Don't warn her. Just stand by the soundboard and let it happen. He nodded, unable to speak, his eyes still fixed on the picture of Vivian and Miles. I had him. As I was walking back to my car, my phone buzzed. A text. It was Pastor Caleb. Riley, confirming our meeting. Tomorrow, in the vestry, 30 minutes before the service. I'll be there waiting. The arena was set. The time was locked. I called Mariah. It's on, I said. I have the visual, I have the accomplice, I have the timeline, and I flipped Nate. Good, she said. The formal notification is drafted. It's addressed to the Denver District Attorney's Office, the IRS Charitable Fraud Division, and the lead detective on the White Collar Crimes Task Force. I have my finger on the send button. It's loaded with the affidavit, the IP logs, the metadata, and the ATM stills. You give the word, and her life as she knows it is over. Wait, I said. Wait for my signal. Riley, this isn't a game. You shouldn't. It's not a game, I said. It's an execution. She wants to do this in the church, in front of her audience. Then I'm going to give her the show she wants. I went home. I took out the dark wool coat I planned to wear to the service. From my desk, I took a small black device, no bigger than a shirt button. It was a high-definition video recorder. I'd used it once for a sting operation at Cedar Line. I spent an hour carefully, patiently, sewing it into the lapel. The tiny pinhole lens perfectly disguised by the black thread. She wanted to meet in the vestry. She wanted to threaten me in private. This time, I wouldn't just record her voice. I would record her face. I was ready. The air in the vestry was thick and still, smelling of old hymnals, floor wax, and the faint, acidic tang of cheap coffee. It was a small, wood-paneled room, a functional dead end between the sanctuary and the back exit. Outside, I could hear the low, expectant murmur of the congregation finding their seats, the sound muffled by the heavy oak door. The organist was playing a soft prelude, a sound that was meant to be calming but now felt like the score for an execution. My button camera was already recording, the tiny lens in my lapel a silent, steady witness. My phone was in my left coat pocket, and my thumb pressed the side button twice, initiating the audio recording app I'd preset. The tiny vibration against my leg confirmed it was active. Pastor Caleb was not there. Vivian was. She stood by the narrow closet where the robes were kept, her back to me. She was dressed in an immaculate cream-colored suit, the very picture of Thanksgiving piety. When she turned, her face was not the warm, welcoming mask of the church hostess. It was a sheet of cold, controlled fury. "You're late," she said. It wasn't an observation. It was an accusation. "Pastor Caleb texted me to meet him here," I said, my voice even. "I know. I sent that text," she said, and her hand moved to the door. She turned the heavy, old-fashioned brass deadbolt. The thunk of the lock sliding into place echoed in the small room. It was a sound of absolute finality. "What is this, Vivian?" She walked toward me, stopping just outside my personal space. She was a performer, and this was her stage, just smaller. "This is an intervention. Riley, this is where you stop. You are not going to ruin this day. You are not going to destroy this church. You are not going to tear this family apart with your fantasies." "It's not a fantasy," I said. I had to get her to confess. The camera was visual, but the audio was the key. "I know about the LLC, Vivian. I know about the account. I know you've been draining the fund." The words hung in the air for a single, frozen second. Her mask of control didn't just crack. It vaporized. The slap was so fast I didn't see it coming. It was a full-force, open-palmed strike that snapped my head to the side. The sound of it was sharp, like a book falling flat, instantly absorbed by the heavy robes and the wooden walls. My cheekbone exploded with a hot, stinging pain. I didn't move. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't even flinch. I just turned my head back, slowly, and looked her directly in the eyes. The lens on my coat was now perfectly aimed at her face, which was contorted with a rage I had never seen. She stepped closer, invading my space, her face inches from mine. She grabbed the front of my coat, her fingers digging into my shoulders. "You listen to me," she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper. 15 minutes before the Thanksgiving service, my stepmother pinned me in the vestry, whispering, "If you say one word, this whole city will swallow you." Her words were the missing piece. The audio file now had the threat that matched the hook of my story. But she wasn't done. Her right hand shot out and clamped down on my left wrist, the one hanging by the pocket with the recording phone. Her fingernails, perfectly manicured, dug into my skin like 4 small, sharp knives. "You think you're so smart," she spat, her voice no longer a whisper. "You, with your spreadsheets and your data, you think you can come into my house, into my church, and accuse me? I built this. I am this community. You are nothing. You are a disloyal, ungrateful child." I still didn't resist. I was a data collector. The pain in my wrist was just a data point. The stinging on my cheek was evidence. I could feel the blood starting to well in the 4 small crescents on my skin. "Let me go, Vivian." "You will be let go when you have done what you are supposed to," she said, shoving me back a step. There was a sudden, sharp knock on the locked door. "Vivian, is everything all right in there?" It was Graham's voice, muffled, anxious, the loyal, terrified guard dog. Vivian didn't even turn. She called out, her voice suddenly smooth as silk, a performer putting her mask back on for a new audience. "Everything is fine, dear. We're just having a moment. Almost done." She turned back to me, her smile a grotesque parody. "See? We are all on the same page. You are the only one out of tune." She released my wrist and walked over to a small side table, where a leather satchel sat. She pulled out a single sheet of paper and a pen. She held it out to me. "What is that?" I asked, my voice deliberately flat. "This is your apology," she said. "This is your confession." I took the paper. My hands were perfectly steady. It was a pre-printed statement, typed in a formal, legislative font. It was a confession. It stated that I, Riley Ashford, had suffered a period of profound personal and financial stress, and had improperly accessed the church's accounts. It said I had created the LLC as a desperate attempt to manage my own debts. It said I had spread false and malicious rumors about my stepmother, Vivian Ashford, to cover my tracks. It ended with a full apology to the committee, to Pastor Caleb, and to the community, and it absolved Vivian of any and all knowledge of my actions. It was my legal suicide note, and Miles Caffrey's print shop metadata was probably all over it. "You want me to sign this?" I said. It wasn't a question. "You will sign this," she corrected me. "You will sign it, and then you will walk out into that sanctuary, and after the service, when Pastor Caleb calls for the clarification, you will stand up and you will read this. You will cry, you will beg for forgiveness, and we, the family, will forgive you. The community will forgive you, and this will all be over." "And if I don't?" Vivian laughed, a short, ugly sound. "If you don't? Then I walk out there, and I show them the bank statements, the R. Ashford account. I will tell them you tried to frame me. I will tell them you are a thief. Graham will back me up. The committee will back me up. Who do you think Pastor Caleb will believe? A woman who has given 10 years to this church, or a bitter, unstable girl who was just caught trying to record her own stepmother?" She nodded at my pocket, the one she'd grabbed. She thought she'd found the recorder. She didn't know about the camera on my chest. I looked at the paper. I looked at her. I let my shoulders slump, let the confidence drain from my face. I let the old fear, the fear of the child who was always wrong, always in trouble, creep into my expression. I let my hand, the one she had clawed, tremble. I don't know," I stammered, the words tasting like ash. This is my whole life. You're asking me to throw it all away." "I'm asking you to save it," she said, her voice softening, sensing victory. "This is the only way." I need a minute," I said, my voice breaking. "I need to think. Can I just have 5 minutes? Please, I need to call the pastor. I need to hear his voice. I trust him." It was a gamble, a desperate, calculated ploy. Vivian stared at me, her eyes searching my face for any sign of deception. She saw only the broken, terrified girl she had always wanted me to be. 5 minutes, she said, her voice full of magnanimous, false compassion. 5 minutes to make your peace. I'll get you a glass of water. You look pale. She was so confident she had won. She walked to the door, unlocked the deadbolt, and slipped out, leaving the door slightly ajar. I could hear her telling Graham, "She just needs a moment. It's all handled." The second the door closed, I moved. The 5 minutes weren't for a phone call. They were for the upload. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The audio file had stopped recording the moment I hit the hold button. It was a 30-megabyte file. I had the auto-sync to cloud feature enabled. Mariah had a shared folder. The second my phone had a data signal, that file would start moving. The church's Wi-Fi was notoriously weak, but my cell signal had 3 bars. The upload progress bar appeared, 10%, 20%. I didn't just wait. I moved to the single, grimy window in the vestry. In the harsh, pre-service light, I held up my left wrist. The 4 nail marks were deep, angry red welts, already beginning to bruise at the edges. I used my phone's camera, the one not uploading, and took 3 clear, high-resolution photographs. My wrist, my face, with the bright red handprint now blooming on my cheek. I forwarded them instantly to Mariah's email. Subject: Evidence. The upload bar hit 90%, 95. The door opened. It wasn't Vivian. It was Pastor Caleb. He looked flustered, his robes bunched in one hand. "Riley, Vivian said you— oh my." He stopped. He saw my face. He saw the red, weeping marks on my wrist as I lowered my phone. He saw the confession paper clutched in my other hand. He saw the scene, a tableau of violence. Before I could speak, Vivian was right behind him, a cup of water in her hand. She took in the scene in a fraction of a second. She saw Caleb's horrified expression. Her reaction was instantaneous. She dropped the glass. It shattered on the floor, water and glass spraying everywhere, and she burst into tears. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. Great, gulping, hysterical sobs. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "She attacked me!" Vivian wailed, collapsing against the door frame, leaning on Caleb for support. "Pastor, she went crazy. She said I was trying to frame her. She grabbed me, she started screaming. I had to defend myself. Look," she held out her own hands, unmarked. "She's out of control." Caleb looked from Vivian, the picture of a hysterical victim, to me, standing silent, my face and arm marked, the shattered glass at my feet. The old fear was there, a cold sickness in my stomach. It was her word against mine. She was the pillar. I was the unstable, ungrateful daughter. She had set the perfect trap. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I stood tall. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. I just looked Pastor Caleb straight in the eye, my gaze as steady and cold as the camera lens on my chest. "Pastor," I said, my voice perfectly clear, cutting through her sobs. "She is lying. I have proof. Please, just hear me out. For 5 minutes, after the service." Caleb looked at me. He looked at Vivian. His face was a mask of confusion, caught between 2 impossible narratives. And then, from the sanctuary, the organ prelude stopped. A deep, resonant chime echoed through the church. Once, twice. The service was beginning. Vivian visibly straightened, wiping her fake tears with a programmed efficiency. Her panic was gone, replaced by the iron certainty of the stage manager. "We will deal with your issues after," she whispered to me, the threat clear. She turned to Caleb, all concern. "Pastor, it's time. We mustn't keep the congregation waiting. Thanksgiving is here." Caleb gave me one last, agonizingly uncertain look. He nodded. Once, a curt, non-committal gesture. Then he turned and walked toward the sanctuary. Vivian followed, adjusting her suit, her composure absolute. I stood alone in the room for a second, surrounded by the smell of old wood, shattered glass, and the lingering, sharp scent of Vivian's perfume. I checked my phone. Upload complete. I straightened my own coat, the button camera still recording. I stepped over the broken glass and walked out of the vestry, into the bright, expectant light of the main hall. The match had moved. The game was no longer in the shadows. It was in the light. I stepped out of the vestry and into the main sanctuary. The transition was blinding. The hall was flooded with light. Not the soft, reverent light of a normal Sunday, but the bright, flat, white light of television. The place was packed. Rocky Ridge Fellowship was not just a church, it was a social and political hub. On Thanksgiving, it was the only place to be seen. Every pew was a dark line of expensive wool and silk. The air was thick with the smell of old money, expensive perfume, and the faint, dusty scent of the hymnals. I saw the cameras immediately. There were 3 of them. Manned, professional. One in the center aisle at the back, one on the right capturing the pulpit, and one on the left, mobile, panning across the choir. The entire service was being streamed live. This was not a private family squabble. It was a public broadcast. Vivian hadn't just built a stage. She'd built a stadium. The front 2 rows were a who's who of Denver's elite. City council members, the CEO of a local bank, the president of the university, and the half-dozen silver-haired legacy donors whose names were engraved on plaques in the lobby. This was Vivian's audience. This was her power base. They were the people she had cultivated, charmed, and flattered for years. They were the jury she had handpicked. I didn't take a seat. I couldn't. I moved to the side, standing in the alcove near the north wall, my back against the cold stone. I was visible, but separate. I was an observer. The button camera on my coat had a clear, unobstructed view of the entire chancel. The organ music swelled, and the service began. Pastor Caleb led the opening call to worship, but his voice was thin. The charisma that usually filled the room felt strained, brittle. He looked pale under the harsh lights. Then it was Vivian's turn. She rose from her seat in the front row and walked to the secondary pulpit, the one reserved for lay leaders and community announcements. She was a vision in her cream-colored suit. She glowed. She owned the space. She leaned into the microphone, and a warm, compassionate smile spread across her face. "What a blessing," she began, her voice a smooth, modulated instrument. "What a truly, truly blessed season this is." She spoke for 10 minutes. She talked about the power of community and the call to service. She painted a picture of herself as a tireless servant, working day and night for the city's most vulnerable. The bruise on my cheek, hidden from most by the angle, began to throb with a dull, hot pulse. "We set an ambitious goal this year," she said, her voice dropping with false humility. "A record goal, and I am so humbled, so deeply moved, to announce that thanks to your incredible generosity," she paused for effect, "we have met and exceeded that goal by over 20%. The applause was immediate and thunderous. The donors in the front row were beaming. They were applauding their own generosity. And she was the conductor. She was taking her bow, financed by my stolen money and built on a foundation of lies. She looked out over the crowd, her gaze sweeping the room. She was magnificent. She was a fraud. When the applause died down, Pastor Caleb stepped back to the main pulpit. We thank Vivian," he said, and his voice was hollow. "We thank her for her tireless leadership." He began the traditional portion of the service, thanking the major donors by name. "We are grateful to the Harrison family for their continued support. We thank the Denver Civic Fund for their partnership." His eyes scanned the front rows, reading the names from a preset list, and then, his gaze lifted. It moved past the donors, past the pews, and found me, standing against the wall. Our eyes locked. He saw me. He saw the swelling on my cheek. He saw the way I was standing, not in prayer, not in submission, but in accusation. I was a fixed point of reality in his carefully constructed world. His voice, in the middle of thanking a benefactor, faltered. He skipped a beat. He looked away, too quickly, back to his notes. But the damage was done. The performance was cracked. The man who had seen the chaos in the vestry was now standing in front of the cameras. And he knew. He knew one of us was a liar. And he knew the proof was in that room. I let my own gaze drift. I found my father. Graham was sitting in the fourth row, on the aisle. He wasn't looking at Caleb. He wasn't looking at Vivian. He was staring directly at me. His face a mask of cold. Parental fury. His posture was rigid, in his lap. He was clutching his smartphone, his thumb resting on the side. He was the enforcer. He was waiting for Vivian's signal, ready to stand up and deliver the evidence that would paint me as the unstable, vindictive thief. He was ready to destroy his own daughter on a live broadcast to protect his wife's reputation. My eyes moved to the back of the sanctuary, to the raised booth that housed the audio-visual controls. Nate was there, a silhouette against the glowing panels. He looked tiny and insignificant, surrounded by a fortress of technology. He was running the live stream. He was in charge of the cameras, the microphones, the giant screens flanking the pulpit. He saw me looking. He couldn't nod, not with other volunteers nearby, but I saw him tap his finger, twice, on the side of the main mixing board. It was the signal we had agreed upon. He remembered the ATM photos. He remembered my promise. He was in position. I searched the crowd for the other faces. There, near the side exit, sitting alone in a pew reserved for overflow, was a woman with short, dark hair. She wore a press pass on a lanyard. Jessa Cole, Denver Independent. She wasn't looking at the pulpit. She was watching the front row, watching Vivian, her pen moving rapidly across a notepad. She had taken my cryptic call. Her journalistic instincts piqued by the names Vivian Ashford and Miles Caffrey. She wasn't here for the sermon. She was here for the story. And outside, I knew. Mariah was waiting. She was parked a block away in her heated car, her laptop open, connected to a secure hotspot. The email was sitting in her draft folder. It was addressed to the Denver District Attorney, the IRS Division for Charitable Fraud, and the lead detective of the city's white-collar crime unit. The email was a digital bomb, loaded with my sworn affidavit, the IP logs, the PDF metadata, the ATM stills, and the high-resolution photos of my injuries. Her finger was poised, waiting for the one-word text from me. Now. I took a slow, deep breath. I ran the checklist in my mind. One final time. The audio file of Vivian's threat. Uploaded. The video file of the assault. Recording. The timeline of the fraud. Memorized. The network of allies. In place. My coat pocket vibrated. I slipped my hand in, keeping my eyes fixed on the pulpit. It was a new text message. From Vivian. She was sitting in the front row, bathed in the adoring light, and she was sending a final threat. I angled the screen so only I could see it. Kneel and apologize after the prayer. It read, "Do it right, and we will be gentle. Make a scene, and Graham will show everyone what you are, your choice." I let my thumb hover over the screen. Then, I turned it off and slid the phone back into my pocket. I didn't reply. My gaze drifted upward, past Caleb's strained face, past the enormous organ pipes, to the massive, polished steel cross that dominated the wall. I had stared at that cross my entire life. It had always been a symbol of judgment, a heavy, unfeeling wall. But today, under the glare of the streaming lights, it was different. It wasn't a wall, it was a mirror. The polished metal reflected the room back at itself. I could see the distorted shapes of the congregation. I could see the bright lights of the cameras. I could see the reflection of the man at the pulpit. It was a mirror, and it was time for the church to see its own reflection. The hymn ended. The choir sat. A profound, expectant silence fell over the room. This was the scheduled moment. This was the clarification Vivian had promised the committee. Pastor Caleb stepped back to the microphone. He gripped the sides of the wooden pulpit, his knuckles white. He was supposed to be starting his Thanksgiving sermon. Instead, he just stood there, silent. The silence stretched. 1 second, 3, 10. It became agonizing. People began to cough, to shift in their seats. Vivian turned in the front row, her head tilted, her smile becoming a fixed, painted-on question mark. Graham leaned forward, his phone now visibly in his hand. Finally, Caleb spoke. His voice was quiet, but the microphone was sensitive. It captured every tremor. "My friends," he began, "today we are here to speak about Thanksgiving, about gratitude, about our many blessings." He paused again, and I could see him swallow. His eyes found me, standing in the shadows. He saw my unblinking, unwavering stare. He saw the bruise. "But," he said, and the word landed with the force of a gavel, "we cannot speak of blessings if we are not also willing to speak of truth. We cannot give thanks for the light if we are content to live in the dark." A low murmur rippled through the front rows. This was not the sermon. This was not on the program. Vivian's smile was gone, replaced by a look of sudden, sharp alarm. "Today," Caleb continued, and his voice found a new strength, a raw, ragged power I had never heard before. "Today we are going to talk about the truth, even when it hurts, even when it costs us, even when it means tearing down the very walls we have built to protect ourselves." The atmosphere in the sanctuary didn't just shift, it shattered. The warm, festive, self-congratulatory air evaporated, sucked out of the room. In its place was a cold, sharp, electric tension. The potential energy that had been building for weeks, the lies, the theft, the threats, the violence. It was all gathering in the air, right above our heads. The storm was no longer coming. We were in it. "I must ask the congregation's forgiveness," Caleb said. His voice, amplified by the speakers, had a new, sharp edge. It cut through the confused murmuring. "We are pausing the traditional order of service before we can give thanks. As a matter of moral and spiritual urgency, we must address a profound and disturbing question of financial integrity regarding the very fund we are here to celebrate." The bottom fell out of the room. This was not a sermon. This was a hearing. Vivian knew it. She shot to her feet, a flash of cream-colored silk against the dark wood of the pew. Her movement was so fast, so violent, that the donors on either side of her recoiled. "Pastor!" she called out, and her voice was no longer the warm, compassionate matriarch. It was a cold, hard blade of command. "I must interrupt. This is grossly inappropriate. We are in the middle of a sacred service. What you are doing is desecrating this holy day." She turned, a masterpiece of calculated, public concern, and she pointed, not at the pulpit, at me. Her finger was a weapon, aimed directly at my heart. "This is a private, family matter," she boomed, her voice now filled with a righteous, theatrical pain. "We have been dealing with a deeply distressed individual. My stepdaughter," she loaded the word with pity and condescension. "Riley, honey," her voice dropped, dripping with false sympathy. "We discussed this. This is not the time. This is not the place. Pastor, I must insist, for the dignity of the church and for the sanctity of this service, that if Riley has a confession to make, she do it privately and beg forgiveness from the community she has so desperately tried to harm." She had done it. She had cast the first stone. She had defined the narrative. I was the unstable, hysterical child. She was the long-suffering victim. The congregation was hers, and they were turning, their eyes, 1,000 points of judgment, all landing on me. I took one step away from the cold stone wall. I moved into the aisle, into the flat, white light of the broadcast. I did not look at Vivian. I looked at Pastor Caleb. "I have no confession to make. Vivian," I said. My voice was not loud, but in the dead, amplified silence, it carried to every corner of the room. "But I will present my findings. I am not a distressed individual. I am a senior fraud investigator at Cedar Line Analytics, and this," I looked from Caleb to the front row of donors, "is not a family matter. It is a criminal conspiracy, and I have evidence." I turned my head, just slightly, my eyes finding the dark raised AV booth at the back of the sanctuary. I lifted my left hand, the one with the 4, angry, red welts on the wrist, and I held it up for him to see. Then, I tapped my index finger once, in the air. It was the signal. In the booth, Nate's hand moved to the main broadcast switcher. The two enormous 40-foot screens on either side of the pulpit, which had been holding a static image of the church's logo, flickered to black. For one agonizing second, the entire congregation stared at the void. And then, the image appeared. It was black and white. It was grainy. A bright digital timestamp marked the corner. It was the ATM surveillance footage. A sound, a great, collective gasp, was sucked out of the room. It was the sound of 1,000 people seeing the unseeable. There she was, unmistakable, Vivian Ashford, in her dark coat, sunglasses on indoors, her face illuminated by the machine's glow. And there, standing just behind her, holding a leather briefcase, was the man in the baseball cap, Miles Caffrey. "What is this?" Vivian shrieked. Her voice cracked. The poise, the control, the performance. It all shattered in a single, hysterical moment. That is nothing. That is me. I am getting cash for the fund, for the volunteers. It is a reimbursement. I paid for supplies myself. This is an outrageous invasion of privacy. This is illegal. This is libel. She was spitting the words out, a rapid-fire defense built on a foundation of pure panic. She was looking at the donors, pleading, trying to rebuild the illusion. "It's not a reimbursement, Vivian," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through her hysteria. I glanced at the booth. "Nate, next slide." The ATM footage vanished. It was replaced by a new image, a screenshot of the Pledge Forward administrative log. I had prepared these slides myself. They were clean, clinical, and simple. Bright yellow highlighting marked the key data. "That withdrawal," I said, my voice the cold, flat tone of an analyst, "was made on Friday, November 15th, at 3:02 in the afternoon. It was one of over a dozen such withdrawals, all for $500, all from the same machine. It was made," I continued, "from the bank account belonging to Ashford Community Outreach LLC, an account which was funded, exclusively, by outbound transfers from the church's Thanksgiving for Every Home Fund, and those transfers—" The screen changed again. A new slide, a screenshot of the login data. "Were all approved and initiated from a single residential IP address." The screen changed, the reverse lookup. "An IP address registered to Graham Ashford, at our family home, using the specific MAC address of the laptop you—" I pointed at her, my hand shaking, not with fear, but with adrenaline. "Posted on your Facebook page 2 weeks ago." "Lies!" It was Graham. He was on his feet, his face a mottled, terrifying purple. He was holding his phone up, waving it like a weapon. "She's fabricating this. She is a sick, vindictive girl. She is trying to frame us. She is the thief. I have the proof. I have the bank statements. The account in her name." He was charging down the aisle, the enforcer, coming to save his queen. "You mean the bank statements forged by Miles Caffrey?" I called out, stopping him in his tracks. "The ones he created on his print shop computer? The PDF metadata proves it. Or are you talking about this?" I didn't look at the booth. I just spoke to the room, my voice ringing with a cold fury. "Nate, play the audio file. Vestry assault, now." A half-second of electronic static, a click. And then, Vivian's voice. It was not her public, charming, compassionate voice. It was the voice from the vestry. It was a low, venomous, animal whisper, and the high-fidelity sound system captured every drop of its poison, blasting it into every corner of the sanctuary. "If you say one word, this whole city will swallow you." The congregation didn't just gasp, they recoiled. People in the front rows physically pulled back, as if a snake had been thrown into the aisle. Graham froze, his hand still in the air, his mouth open, the color drained from his face. Vivian looked like she had been shot. She staggered back, her hand flying to her throat, a small, strangled noise escaping her. She looked at the speakers, at the screens, at me, her mind failing to comprehend how her private, whispered threat had become a public broadcast. In the side pew, Jessa Cole was no longer writing. She was on her feet, her own phone held high, recording the entire scene, her face a mask of ferocious, journalistic hunger. And a block away, in a warm car, Mariah Keene read the text I had just sent. Now, and hit the send button on her laptop. The digital bomb, loaded with the affidavit, the logs, the metadata, the ATM stills, and the photos of my bruised face and wrist, was now flying across the city, landing in the inboxes of the district attorney, the IRS, and the Denver police. The clock was ticking. The sanctuary exploded. It was a wall of noise, shouting, accusations, people standing, pointing at Vivian, pointing at me. The donors in the front row were on their feet, yelling at Graham. It was chaos. It was pandemonium. Silence! Caleb's voice was a physical force. It was a roar of pure, absolute command, a sound of such genuine, righteous fury that it shocked the room into submission. "Sit down," he thundered. "All of you, sit down. Vivian, Graham, you will return to your seats. You will not speak. You will not move. You will listen." He looked at me. The confusion was gone. His eyes were hard, clear, and full of a terrible cold fire. "Ms. Ashford, you said you had findings. Finish them." I took a deep breath. The button camera was still rolling. I looked at the donors. I looked at the cameras. I was no longer the daughter. I was the analyst delivering her report. "This was not a mistake," I said, my voice clear and cold, cutting through the silence. "This was a systematic, calculated fraud, executed over 6 months. Step 1. Vivian Ashford and her partner, Miles Caffrey, established a shell company, Ashford Community Outreach, LLC. They used my name and forged my identity to open the bank accounts and credit cards, intending to frame me when they were discovered. Step 2. Vivian used her sole, unaudited administrative access to the church's financial accounts to approve dozens of fraudulent vendor payments to that shell company. Graham Ashford, at their home, used his laptop to execute the final transfers. Step 3. Vivian and Miles withdrew the laundered money as cash from the ATM. As you have seen, they also used the corporate card, in my forged name, for thousands of dollars in luxury personal goods, all while posting on social media about distributing gifts to the poor. Step 4. When I discovered the initial thefts from my own bank account and refused to wire Vivian $10,000 to cover her shortfall, they initiated an active cover-up. Step 5. Miles Caffrey, at his print shop, forged the bank statements in my name to plant as evidence. The metadata on the PDF file proves his authorship. Step 6. Vivian sent the anonymous text to Pastor Caleb, accusing me of the crime. And Step 7, I said, my voice finally shaking, not with weakness, but with a white-hot rage. Less than 1 hour ago, in the vestry, when I confronted her, she locked the door. She physically assaulted me, I pointed to my cheek, and she attempted to blackmail me into signing a false confession, threatening my life and my reputation. The audio you just heard was from that meeting, the video. I tapped the button on my coat. Is still recording. I finished. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. It was the sound of a vacuum. In the front row, the CEO of the bank was not looking at me. He was on his phone, his face grim, scrolling through what I knew were his donation receipts. The other donors were in a huddle, whispering, their faces a uniform mask of cold fury. They had not just been robbed, they had been used. Their reputations had been tied to a fraud. They had applauded their own humiliation. Pastor Caleb Whitlow closed his eyes. He stood at the pulpit, his hands gripping the wood, his head bowed. The entire church, the entire city watching online, waited. When he opened his eyes, all the fear, all the doubt, was gone. There was only the terrible, burning clarity of a man who had finally chosen a side and knew it would cost him everything. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He was about to speak, to pass a judgment that would change every position of power in that entire sanctuary. Pastor Caleb Whitlow held his hands up, not in prayer, but to command the room. The chaos subsided, replaced by a thick, vibrating silence. He looked at me, then at Vivian, then at the congregation. He had crossed a line, and now he had to walk the path he had chosen. "I need to make a confession of my own," Caleb said. His voice was heavy, every word landing with the weight of stone. "Ms. Ashford is correct. I, too, received an anonymous communication, a text message, sent just yesterday, accusing her of the very crimes we have just heard outlined, accusing her of sabotaging this fund, of being an unstable element." He paused, and his gaze swept the front row, landing on the donors. I must, to my profound shame, admit that I was tempted to believe it. It is easier to believe that one person is sick than to believe the entire foundation is rotten. It is easier to silence a single, inconvenient voice than to face the powerful. He looked directly at Vivian. She stared back, her expression frozen, a mask of indignant disbelief. But I was already in possession of a truth that made that anonymous text complicated. Caleb continued, "I, too, have had doubts, not for weeks, but for months. The numbers, the ones Mrs. Ashford so proudly presented, they never felt right. The disbursements for the program seemed to be vastly outpacing the actual physical supplies we were receiving." The committee members in the front row stirred, whispering. This was new to them. This was an indictment of their oversight. "Last month," Caleb said, "I used my pastoral discretionary fund to hire an independent, outside auditor, a forensic accountant from a firm in Boulder. I asked him to conduct a secret, internal review of the Thanksgiving for Every Home Fund, reporting only to me." The color drained from Vivian's face. This was a variable she could not, have planned for. "That audit was delivered to my office 2 days ago," Caleb said, his voice dropping. "The day before I received the text message attempting to frame Ms. Ashford." He reached under the pulpit. He pulled out a thick, spiral-bound report. It was identical to the black binder I held in my mind. The audit found exactly what Ms. Ashford found, but it found more. It found a shadow ledger, buried in the church's server, a file accessible by only one administrator password, Mrs. Ashford's password. It was a secondary set of books, invisible to the committee, invisible to me, a column labeled Off-Category Disbursements. "In this column," Caleb said, his voice rising, "were tens of thousands of dollars, not to catering companies, not to food banks, but to a single vendor, over and over, a vendor I did not recognize, Miles Printworks." He lifted his head, his eyes scanning the pews at the back of the church. "I see now, from Ms. Ashford's evidence, what those charges were for, but I also see the man who submitted those invoices. He is here, in this sanctuary, Mr. Miles Caffrey." The mobile camera, controlled by Nate, swiveled. It moved past the shocked faces of the congregation and zoomed, landing on the man in the back row. The man from the ATM footage, Miles Caffrey, his face, projected 40 feet high on the screens, was a mask of pure, sweat-drenched terror. "Mr. Caffrey," Caleb's voice was a judgment, "you are sitting in the house of God. You are surrounded by the community you have helped to defraud. You have heard the evidence. You have seen your face on that screen. I ask you, before God and this congregation, did you, or did you not, submit fraudulent phantom invoices to Mrs. Ashford for printing services that were never rendered?" Miles looked like a cornered animal. He looked at Vivian, a desperate, silent plea. He looked at the exits. Jessa Cole, the reporter, was already on her feet, moving silently up the aisle, her phone held high, recording his face. He was trapped. I, he stammered, his voice a thin, pathetic squeak, barely captured by the ambient microphones. It wasn't. I had debts. I had gambling debts. A low groan went through the room. "She knew!" he cried, his voice cracking. He pointed a shaking finger at Vivian. "She knew! She said she could help me, that the church had a discretionary fund," she said. She said just print the invoices, make them look real, and she would approve them. She said she would pay them from the fund, and I could keep 30% and give the rest back to her, in cash. He was confessing. He was confirming the entire loop. He was providing the motive and the mechanism. "She said it was fine," he sobbed. "She said it was just moving money around to help the community. She said, he is lying." Vivian's scream was primal. It was not a word. It was a sound of pure, undiluted negation. She was on her feet again, her face a terrifying, contorted mask of hatred. "He is lying. This is a conspiracy. That girl," she pointed at me, her hand shaking. "She found this degenerate, and paid him to lie. She has fabricated everything. There is no LLC. There is no signature. It's all forged. It's all lies. The LLC is very real, Vivian." My voice was quiet, cold, and final. I looked to the booth. "Nate, the final slide. LLC, signature full." The screens changed. Miles's sobbing face vanished. It was replaced by a split-screen image. On the left was the official document from the Colorado Secretary of State's office, incorporating Ashford Community Outreach, LLC. On the right, highlighted in a bright red box, was the metadata for the digital signature that had executed the contract. "That," I said, pointing to the screen, "is the IP address used to sign and file the incorporation documents for the shell company. It was logged at 10:02 in the morning 6 months ago." I turned, my entire body, and looked at my father. He was still frozen in the aisle. "And that," I said, as the screen flashed to the reverse lookup report, "is the Comcast registration for that IP address, registered to Graham Ashford, our home, on a Tuesday morning when I was sitting at my desk at Cedar Line, 30 miles away. All the air, all the fight, all the righteous, indignant fury went out of Graham Ashford. He looked at the screen. He looked at the donors, their faces like granite. He looked at Vivian, his wife, the woman who had promised him prestige, the woman he had just been exposed for. He looked at her, his eyes pleading, 'Save me, fix this.' Vivian just stared at the screen. She had no more moves. She had no more lies. She had no more stage. Graham turned back to the congregation, to the donors, his face crumbling. The mask of the proud, successful executive melted away, revealing the terrified, weak man underneath. I, he stammered, his hands raised, a gesture of surrender. "You don't understand. The pressure, the expectations of this community. We had to maintain the image. It was just pressure. Vivian. She said it was just borrowing, just moving it around, to cover the shortfalls. She promised we would pay it back. Before the audit, it was just family pressure." He had confessed. He had admitted to the moving money around. He had admitted to knowing about the shortfalls and the borrowing. He had implicated himself in the entire conspiracy, and his only defense was pressure. The silence that fell on the church was not a holy silence. It was the silence of a tomb. It was the sound of an entire community's illusions shattering at the exact same moment. They had come for a Thanksgiving service to celebrate their own virtue and generosity. They were instead front-row witnesses to a live broadcast confession of a massive, coordinated fraud, executed by the very people they had elevated as pillars of their community. This had never happened before. Not here. Not in their church. Caleb stepped forward, his face etched with a profound, weary sadness. He raised his hand. "As of this moment," he declared, his voice resonating with the finality of a judge's gavel. "The entire Thanksgiving Finance Committee is suspended, effective immediately. All fund assets are frozen, pending a full, external investigation." He looked at me, his eyes full of a pain I recognized, the pain of a truth that costs everything. "All of the documents from my internal audit," he said, "and the complete, unedited evidence file presented by Ms. Ashford, including the audio and video recordings of her assault, will be turned over to the Denver District Attorney's Office. I am told they are already on their way." He then did something I never expected. He stepped out from behind the pulpit. He walked down the chancel steps, onto the floor. He walked directly to me, standing in the aisle, in the full glare of the lights. He stopped, 2 feet in front of me. He looked at the bruise on my cheek. "Ms. Ashford," he said, and his voice was no longer the boom of a pastor, but the quiet, broken voice of a man. "Riley, in the vestry, I was presented with 2 realities. I was afraid. I was afraid of scandal. I was afraid of what this would do to the church I have given my life to. I received that anonymous text, and in my fear, I doubted you. I was prepared to ask you to be silent, to sacrifice your truth for our reputation." He took a deep breath. "That was a sin. It was a profound moral failure. And before God and this entire congregation, I apologize to you. You are a woman of staggering integrity and courage. You did not just save this fund. You have saved the soul of this church, and I failed you. I am sorry." A new voice, thin and amplified, cracked through the silence. It was Nate. It was coming over the main speakers, from the booth. I did it," he said, his voice shaking. "I helped her. I put the slides on the screen." Graham turned, his face a mask of betrayal. "Nate, you... "I did it," Nate said, stronger now. "Because she was the only one who told me the truth. Vivian, you offered me a job. You used me. You used my media plan to cover this. I choose to stand with the truth. I choose to stand with my sister." Vivian, who had been standing, frozen, a statue of rage, finally crumpled. She looked at her husband, a confessed co-conspirator. She looked at her son, her chief accuser. She looked at Caleb, her judge, and she looked at the front row, at the donors, who were not looking at her with pity or anger, but with the cold, dead eyes of a board of directors about to liquidate a failed asset. She knew, in that moment, she had lost. She had lost the stage. She had lost the audience. She had lost the narrative. She slowly, mechanically, sat down in the front pew, a puppet whose strings had just been cut. She just stared forward, at the empty cross. The apology from Pastor Caleb hung in the air, a final stunning confession that sucked all the remaining oxygen from the room. The congregation sat, stunned, a field of statues, the broadcast cameras, now controlled by a frantic-looking volunteer who had taken over for Nate, panned aimlessly across the horrified faces, capturing a raw, unfiltered public trauma. The silence stretched, becoming a physical weight. It was broken by the sound of the heavy oak doors at the back of the sanctuary swinging open. It wasn't a parishioner leaving in disgust. It was the measured, authoritative footsteps of people who did not belong there. 2 uniformed Denver police officers stepped into the nave, their hands resting on their belts, their eyes scanning the room. Behind them, a woman in a dark gray pantsuit, with a detective's badge clipped to her belt, stepped inside. Her gaze was cold, assessing. She had an earpiece in, and she was holding her phone, the screen glowing. She was looking at the email Mariah had sent. A new ripple of sound went through the room. Not a gasp, but a low, terrified murmur. This was no longer a spiritual crisis. It was a crime scene. The detective walked calmly down the center aisle. She passed the pews, her footsteps the only sound in the vast hall. Jessa Cole, the reporter, had her phone up, recording the detective's approach. The detective didn't look at Caleb. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the front row. She stopped at the pew where Vivian sat, a still, porcelain doll of a woman, her face as white as her suit. "Vivian Ashford?" The detective's voice was flat, professional. It needed no amplification. Vivian did not move. She just stared at the empty cross. "Mrs. Ashford, I need you to stand up." Slowly, as if her bones were made of glass. Vivian rose. The detective turned her, gently but firmly, and motioned for her to place her hands behind her back. "You are under arrest for felony embezzlement, wire fraud, and assault." The click-click-click of the handcuffs was sharp, definitive. It was the sound of a final, unchangeable reality, the sound of a lock turning. Vivian didn't cry. She didn't protest. She just deflated. The power, the charm, the righteous fury. It all drained out of her, leaving an empty middle-aged woman in an expensive suit, her wrists bound. The second officer had moved to the back, to where Miles Caffrey was still slumped between two horrified church elders. "Mr. Caffrey? You're coming with us. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and forgery." Miles, who had been sobbing, just nodded, his relief at being caught palpable. He stood and put his hands behind his back, a willing prisoner. The detective then turned to my father. Graham was still standing in the aisle, a ghost, his phone hanging limply from his hand. "Graham Ashford?" He flinched, as if he'd been slapped. He nodded, a tiny, palsied movement. The detective looked him up and down, a long, assessing gaze that seemed to peel him apart, layer by layer. She saw the expensive suit, the shaking hands, the collapsed, hollow core. "You will be receiving a summons to appear," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "The charges will include conspiracy to commit wire fraud and violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Do not leave the state. A detective will be at your home this afternoon. You are not to touch any computer in that house. Do you understand me?" "Yes," he whispered. She didn't cuff him. It was, in its own way, a more profound humiliation. He was the weak link, the collaborator, the man who had already confessed on a live broadcast. He wasn't a flight risk. He was just a future plea bargain. He was not even worth the steal. He stumbled back, collapsing into the pew, a publicly disgraced, ruined man, left to sit in the wreckage his wife had created. As the officers led Vivian and Miles out, a path clearing before them as if they were lepers, Caleb stepped back to the pulpit. His face was gray, but his voice was firm. "The police are here," he announced to the room. "Because this church will cooperate fully with the law, we will hide nothing. The truth, in all its forms, will be our only path forward." He then addressed the stunned donors. "As of this moment, the Thanksgiving for Every Home Fund is frozen. Its assets are seized. I have, on my own authority, already engaged an independent auditing firm from outside this state. They will conduct a full forensic audit of the last 5 years of this church's finances. Every donor," his eyes were grim, "will be contacted personally. You will be given a full accounting of where your money went, and every single one of you will be offered a full, immediate refund." A hand shot up. It was an older woman, one of the main legacy donors. "But Pastor, the families. The meals are supposed to be delivered tonight. What about the families who are waiting for their Thanksgiving dinner?" Caleb nodded. "The families will be cared for. The Thanksgiving fund is corrupt. It is closed. But our mission is not. I and the other pastors on this staff are opening a new emergency fund, effective immediately. It will be seeded tonight. From our own salaries, the families will eat, but they will be served by a fund built on transparent truth, not on a foundation of lies." The service did not end. It simply dissolved. People began to file out, not with the usual post-sermon chatter, but in a heavy, stunned silence. It was the exit of a congregation that had just witnessed a public execution and a corporate collapse all in one. Jessa Cole was at the back, already interviewing a furious-looking councilman. Before I had even reached my car, my phone was vibrating, a continuous, screaming buzz of notifications. The first was an alert from the Denver Independent. Jessa's story was already online, posted less than 30 minutes after the arrests. The headline was a masterpiece of devastating simplicity. The Thanksgiving Truth. Ashford Charity Fund collapses in live-streamed arrests. It had everything. The ATM photo, clear and sharp, a still from the broadcast, capturing the look of pure terror on Graham's face as he confessed. A direct quote from Miles's on-air confession and was sourced from an anonymous high-level donor. A copy of the fraudulent LLC's registration. It was the fastest, most brutal, and most comprehensive journalistic takedown I had ever seen. The story was already rocketing across the city's social media. The second call was from Mark, my boss at Cedarline. I let it go to voicemail. His message was breathless, left while he was clearly walking. Riley, I just saw the news. My God. The partners and I are watching the stream. We are in absolute, total awe of your integrity, of your courage. We are issuing a formal statement of support from the firm in 1 hour. You have a bonus. You have a promotion. You have whatever you want. We are proud. We are honored that you are one of us. I called him back, my voice shaking from the adrenaline crash. Mark, I said, thank you, but I don't want a bonus, and I'm not doing any interviews. I want one thing. Name it, he said, his voice firm. I want Cedarline's legal department to ensure that the names of my sources are protected, the data providers, the bank manager who gave me the ATM still. They helped me do the right thing, and they put their careers on the line. They must be protected. I want them to be ghosts. Done, Mark said, without a moment's hesitation. Consider them ghosts. Go home, Riley. You've done enough. I drove through the quiet city streets, the world outside oblivious. My phone buzzed. A text message from a number I didn't recognize. It was Nate. I'm at a friend's house. I packed a bag. I'm not going back there. I don't know what happens next. But thank you. You didn't just save me. You saved the whole city from a stain. I'm sorry it took me so long to see. I pulled into my garage, the silence of the concrete tomb a welcome relief. As I walked to the elevator, my phone rang again. It was Mariah. I'm at the courthouse, she said, her voice crisp and bright. I just walked out of the judge's chambers. I filed the petition for an emergency protective order, citing the assault in the vestry. I attached the audio file, the video file from your button cam, and the high-resolution photos of your face and wrist. The judge didn't even blink. The temporary order is granted, effective immediately. Vivian and Graham are both legally barred from coming within 500 feet of you, your home, or your office. I leaned against the cold wall of the elevator. Safety. It was a concept I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The lock on my apartment door finally felt real. The last piece of fallout came that evening. A formal email from the church's administrative board. It was a public statement, sent to the entire congregation and the press. It announced that, in the wake of the devastating revelations of fraud and a catastrophic failure of leadership and oversight, Pastor Caleb Whitlow had tendered his temporary, indefinite resignation, effective immediately. He was taking responsibility. He had chosen the truth, and the price for that truth was his pulpit. It was a dignified retreat, a final act of integrity, falling on his sword to give the institution a chance to heal. I sat in my dark apartment, the city lights outside seeming too bright, too festive. The case was closed. The truth was out. The guilty were charged. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt victorious. I just felt empty. My laptop, open on the coffee table, chimed. A new email. It was from a Proton Mail address, an anonymous, encrypted service. The subject line was blank. The body of the email was only 4 words. You will regret this. The coldness that had been receding flooded back, a sharp, icy spike in my chest. It was the old, familiar fear. The war wasn't over. I forwarded it to Mariah. I didn't add a message. I didn't need to. She replied 10 minutes later. Her text was grim. It's him, Graham. The IP address is from a public library terminal, but the email service's recovery address, it's a forgot password link to his old defunct AOL account. He's stupid, and he's desperate. He's already violating the protective order, and that makes him dangerous. Another notification popped up on my screen. It was a calendar invite from Mariah, a formal, legal notification. Initial hearing, State v. Ashford, et al. The date was set, December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. I closed the laptop. They were cuffed. They were charged. They were exposed. But my father was still out there, a ghost in the machine, whispering threats from a library computer. The story wasn't over. The battle was won. But the war for my freedom, that was just beginning. The anonymous threat from my father. "You will regret this," was the last gasp of a dead narrative. Mariah had it logged as witness intimidation. The weeks leading up to the December 23rd court date were quiet. The city, having feasted on the scandal from Jessa Cole's explosive article, had moved on to the next outrage, the Rocky Ridge Fellowship, now under the control of an independent oversight board, was silent. Its doors closed until the new year. The quiet was a relief. But it was the cold, sterile quiet of a hospital hallway, not the warmth of peace. The courtroom was packed. It was the last business day before Christmas. But no one was missing this. Jessa Cole was in the press row, pen poised. Nate was in the gallery, sitting alone, a grim-faced spectator. Pastor Caleb Whitlow sat near the prosecution, his face etched with a new, somber clarity. He was here as the state's star witness. And they were there. Miles Caffrey, who had already accepted a plea deal in exchange for his full testimony. My father, Graham, his face gray and collapsed, his expensive suit hanging on him like a shroud, and Vivian. The handcuffs and the bright orange jumpsuit were a brutal contrast to her composed, icy expression. She intended to plead not guilty. The prosecution began with Caleb. This was not the man who had resigned in disgrace. This was a man who had been burned clean. He testified about the internal audit, the shadow ledgers, the fear. "I have a final, private truth to add," Caleb said, looking at the judge. "I delayed that audit. I delayed it by weeks. I knew, deep down, something was wrong, but I was afraid." "Afraid of what, Mr. Whitlow?" the prosecutor asked. "Of her," Caleb said, looking at Vivian. "Of her power, her influence, her connections to the donors in the front row. I was afraid of exactly what happened. A scandal that would tear the church apart. I put the reputation of the institution above the integrity of its soul. My inaction allowed this to continue. I am here to state, under oath, that Riley Ashford did the job I was too cowardly to do. He was not just a witness, he was a confession. He was placing ethics, finally, above his own, ruined reputation." The prosecutor then held up the anonymous text I had received. "Mr. Whitlow, you received a similar text, did you not? One attempting to frame Ms. Ashford?" "I did," Caleb said. "And you?" The prosecutor turned to me. "You received a threat from the defendant, Graham Ashford, after his arrest?" "I did," I said. The prosecutor projected the timeline. The state's evidence shows the anonymous text sent to Pastor Caleb, attempting to frame Riley Ashford, was sent from a burner phone at 10:14 in the morning, and the audio recording of the assault, where Mrs. Ashford threatened Ms. Ashford's life, was recorded at 10:18. She was actively trying to frame her victim while planning the assault. The defense attorney for Graham stood. He tried the only card he had left. He tried to paint the broken family narrative. He portrayed Graham as a loving, manipulated husband, a father heartbroken by a vindictive, fame-seeking daughter who had destroyed her own family for a headline. Graham, seeing his opening, actually began to weep, playing the part of the tragic patriarch. The prosecutor simply called his next witness. "The state calls Nate Ashford." Nate walked to the stand. his face pale but resolute. He looked past Graham. My father says this was a broken family. That's a lie. This was a broken moral compass. This was a family destroyed by adults who chose greed. I was offered a job, a salary, to be the media director for this fraud. They weren't protecting a family. They were protecting an income stream. They are not victims. They are perpetrators. Then it was my turn. I didn't give a speech. I just presented the timeline. The black binder, now a formal exhibit, the log files, the metadata. The video of the assault in the vestry was played on the courtroom screens. The sound of the slap, the sound of her whisper. If you say one word. Vivian's lawyer objected. Graham's lawyer objected. The judge overruled them all. The truth was now a matter of public record. I presented the final slide, a clean spreadsheet, not of what was stolen, but of what was owed, a full repayment plan, detailing every dollar that should have gone to the food banks, the caterers, the shelters. I was showing the court and the press exactly where the money was supposed to go. The room was silent as I stepped down. As I passed the prosecution table, the detective who had arrested Vivian leaned in. "We got a final gift," she whispered to the prosecutor, just loud enough for me to hear. The prosecutor smiled. "Your Honor, the state has one final piece of evidence, recovered from the locked committee safe in the vestry, the one only Mrs. Ashford had access to." He produced a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a leather briefcase. Miles Caffrey's briefcase. "Inside this case," the prosecutor said, "officers found $22,000 in bundled, unmarked cash. They also found the receipts for the Neiman Marcus purchases and the forged printing invoices from Miles Printworks, and the forensics team ran the prints. The bag, the cash, and the receipts were covered in the fingerprints of two people, Vivian Ashford and Miles Caffrey." He paused, letting the weight of it land. There was not one single, identifiable fingerprint from Riley Ashford found on any of it. That was the end. The R. Ashford bank account, the vindictive daughter narrative, all of it evaporated. The physical proof was absolute. Vivian's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, my client wishes to change her plea." The end was fast. Vivian pleaded guilty to all charges. In return for his testimony, Miles received 5 years probation. Graham, convicted of conspiracy and witness intimidation, received 3 years probation, 2,000 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay full financial restitution. Vivian was sentenced to 8 years in state prison. The judge, looking at her, said only, "You did not just steal money, you stole the public's faith." Caleb, in his final act before leaving the city, formally announced the creation of the new, transparent online fund. He invited 3 independent, outside nonprofits to sit on its board. The aftermath was quiet. I declined every interview, every offer to be honored. When Graham's first restitution checks began to arrive, I met with Cedarline. They had offered me a bonus. I offered them a counter-proposal. We used the restitution money, matched by the firm, to establish the Data Ethics Scholarship for investigative analytics students at the local university. I wanted more people like me out there, hunting for the ghosts in the machine. Nate became the first full-time volunteer manager for the new church fund. He found his purpose, not in media, but in service, running the fund with the total transparency he had been denied. 6 months later, after completing an intensive program on nonprofit governance and transparency, Caleb Whitlow was invited back by the new, reformed board. He returned to the pulpit, a changed man. I didn't go back to the church, not for a long time. It was a mild evening last week. I was walking home. My wrist, where her nails had dug in, had healed. The scars were just 4 pale, silver lines. I found myself standing across the street from the church. The lights were on. Trucks were being loaded. It was the new fund, distributing fresh food for the weekly meal program. Nate was there, clipboard in hand, laughing with another volunteer. I just stood there, watching. My freedom wasn't about the prison sentence. It wasn't about the money. It was about this. The ability to stand in the light, to no longer be afraid of the shadows. The ability to watch the truth, heavy and real as a box of food, being loaded up and sent out into the world. The spotlight I had feared all my life was finally, warm. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from, so please comment below and let's connect and share our thoughts. Make sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.